Ken's Diner. Officer Palmer had become a sort of father figure to Jake over the span of nearly 5 years. He'd advised Jake to get a job after graduating from high school, any job, and work hard for a couple of years, secure the kind of reputation that the department valued. Jake took this advice seriously. In late June of 1978, just 2 weeks following his graduation, Jake found a job as a dishwasher at Ken's, a local steakhouse where cops were known to frequent. Officer Palmer had told Jake about the place, and after hearing that it was a local police officer magnet, he immediately applied. The manager knew Officer Palmer well, and she was all too happy to help a friend. She hired Jake after a 10-minute poor excuse for an interview, and Jake's first day at his first full-time job started the following day. After he was given a short tour of the restaurant and a locker to call his own, Jake threw on his Ken's Diner forest green apron and started work with 3 to 11 p.m. shift. His sole responsibility was dishes. Occasionally, one of the cooks might ask him to fetch an onion or to break open a box of flour, and Jake was happy to do anything. But the end of the shift shriveled his hands, as he was a full-time dishwasher through and through. He worked with a 28-year-old single man named Bill Alsack, a tall, skinny guy with curly brown hair and a rather distinctively pronounced Adam's apple. Bill had been hired when he was 23 years old. He'd served 4 years in the military immediately following high school, and then had spent an entire year in what he called a funk, half-heartedly looking for work here and there, but never really wanting it. When Jake was first hired, Bill rarely spoke with him. Jake would bring up the simple everyday things that one might expect, the food, weather, sports, but Bill didn't seem to have any interests. He worked hard, clearly the reason Ken had kept him for as long as he had, but Jake was sure that Bill Alsack was permanently stuck with back-of-the-store tasks. And one day, Jake did get him to crack a smile. They were unloading a produce truck when they finished. The driver, a husky guy about 30 years old, asked them to sign the invoice. He handed the pen to Bill, and while Bill was signing, the driver took out a picture of a girl. "You guys ever seen anything like that?" He handed the picture to Jake. The toothy blonde had her backside to the camera. She was standing next to what looked to Jake like a barn door, her upper torso turned just enough to reveal a rather long line of cleavage. Her come-and-get-it smile, accentuated with a long cigarette, took Jake aback, and he shouted, "Holy monsters!" And he laughed nervously. "Look at that! Holy monsters!" Jake repeated, and he handed the picture to Bill. "Take a look." Bill gazed at the picture, and the longer he looked, the more his eyes widened. He whistled, and then he grinned, and with that, Jake felt that he'd accomplished a lot. Bill stated quietly, "Lord, that's amazing. Look at that." The driver swiped the picture from his hand and said, "Get that tongue back in your mouth, Rufus." Jake asked, "Who the hell is that? Your girlfriend?" The driver snickered and said, "Hell, I wish on my granny's grave." Then he said, "I cut it out of a magazine I found at Rawlins Bowl the other day. It's a fucking cigarette advertisement." Jake replied, "Hell, I got a Virginia Slim she could put in that pretty little mouth any day." Bill had by now just about made it back into the restaurant. He stopped, the grin still lingering. "Lord, that is amazing." The driver climbed up into the cab, slammed the door, and stuck his arm out the window. "Sorry to tease you with something like that, boys." As he drove out, he yelled, "Hope I didn't rile little Willie too much." And he laughed like he just told the funniest joke ever. And he laid on the horn and yelled, "She's even got this old rig horned up." And he let out a belly roar as he drove off. Jake shook his head and laughed. As they walked back to the kitchen, he asked Bill if he was married or had a girlfriend, and Bill seemed to lighten up a little. "Well, I'm not married, not yet anyway." "Aha!" Jake replied. "Tell me more, my friend." I got me a picture of my own if you'd like to see." He slid it from his wallet and turned it over. The grin on his face revealed more life than Jake had seen from the first day he'd met him. "She might not be something like that nasty Virginia Slims girl with those big boobs, but my girl is something special." Jake glanced at the picture and was about to hand it back. Then he looked again, this time more closely. That's nice. What's her name? Her name is Nancy. Jake froze. The look on his face surprised Bill. What's wrong? Bill asked. Oh, Jake said. Nothing really. It's just that when you first showed me the picture, I thought she looked a little like a high school buddy's mom. Is that right? Bill asked. Yeah. And now you tell me her name is Nancy, right? Yes, sir, that's her name. Bill returned the picture to his wallet. Jake grinned real big. She your fiancée? No, not yet. Then Bill smiled and said, but I got plans for next week to change that. You're getting married to her next week? I'm going to ask her next week. Pop the question. That's great, Bill. Yeah, I've been saving up for a long time now. I got her a promise ring that she'll have to wear till I can find and buy a better one. Then he led Jake to the lockers and pulled a small box out of the back corner of his own. He slowly opened it to reveal the narrow gold band, 2 tiny twin diamonds embedded, one next to the other. Wow, Jake exclaimed. It must have cost you a pretty penny. Well over $200, Bill admitted. And 2 diamonds, that's nice, man. Yep, diamonds are me and her. He pulled the picture out of his wallet and pointed to it. She's a gem, and I'm hoping to be a gem for her. Geez, did you buy it new? Bill sighed and said, sort of. I got a friend who works at Merle's pawn shop down round Trumbull. He told me about it. Said she'd give me a good deal. Bill closed the lid and slid the box to the back of his locker. I don't want to take it to my apartment on account of they've been having some break-ins lately, so I just keep it here. Makes sense to me, Jake replied. They worked together well, Jake and Bill. And the more time passed, the more comfortable Bill felt around Jake. He slowly began to answer some of the questions that Jake asked. Not that Jake was all that interested, but talking helped pass the time. Bill soon became accustomed to Jake's keen sense of humor, and he even laughed with him from time to time. A few weeks into the job, Jake felt comfortable enough to ask Bill why he'd stayed at Ken's for as long as he had. They were sitting in the break room just behind the kitchen. Bill took a drag on his Pall Mall cigarette and replied calmly, I'm lucky to be working at all. He lifted his soda-filled styrofoam cup and took a sip, then looked at Jake. Ken's been good to me these past 5 years. I like this job, so that's why I stay. That, and it keeps me sane. Everyone needs something to keep him sane. He took another drag off his cigarette and asked, What do you know about the war? Jake shrugged his shoulders and replied, Just glad I was still in high school when it ended. Never wanted to go myself. And that damn draft would have been a bitch to be sure. Bill took another hit on his Pall Mall and exhaled. I never wanted to go either. But I wasn't born at the right time, and that draft was a son of a bitch to be sure. He paused, then he mumbled, But it was the war itself that was the real bitch. He stared at the wall in front of him. Now curious, Jake asked, Hey, is it true that they used to just walk into some of those grass huts and kill anyone in sight, even if it was a kid? Bill looked at the ceiling and held his stare for a moment, then nodded. I heard that used to happen. He took a last drag of his cigarette and snubbed it out and gazed at Jake. Never seen it myself, though. Jake shook his head. Jesus H. Christ, that was a messy war. Glad it's over. Bill stood and tossed his cup into the garbage can and walked out the door and back to work. Jake mumbled, Allsack. What kind of fucking name is that anyway? Dale Cletus Conway. Jake returned to the large industrial sink at the far end of the kitchen. He'd become rather the expert at his task. After filling the commercial dishwasher, he flipped a large plastic switch. The machine began its loud hum as he dried his hands and grabbed his cup of soda. The restaurant manager, Twyla, a very hefty early 40s lady with a strong accent, Southern accent, and an equally strong appetite for greasy food and meaningless conversation, was seated at the table just at the double swinging doors to the kitchen. She popped her head through and saw Jake leaning against the sink. "How's it going in there, honey?" Jake liked Twyla because she seemed to like him. Even if he screwed up once in a while or one way or another, she'd put her chubby arm around him, rub his head, and tell him it was okay. "I'm doing great, Miss Twyla." She had asked Jake to address her as Miss Twyla because it somehow made her feel younger. "Just started up old Hurricane." "Hurricane?" "Oh, yeah." And Jake pointed to the roaring dishwasher. "Miss Twyla, meet Hurricane." Twyla laughed. "Oh, my God, sweetie, you are so funny." "Is it really busy out there?" Jake asked. It was nearly 9, and he knew the answer. She cocked her head and replied, "Not really. Most folks have left by now. Kind of slow out here. Couple of police officers just finishing up. There's one family that wants some dessert. That's it. Did you get your break already?" "Yes, ma'am, thanks." "Well, heck, that's okay, honey. Come out here and rest your bones. I got someone I want you to meet." Twyla held one of the doors open for Jake. Next to her sat a very gaunt 50-something man. "This here's Dale. Jake, Dale Cletus Conway." Dale stood and offered his hand. Given Dale's stature, Jake was surprised at his strong grip, guessing him no taller than 5'5", and no heavier than 120 pounds. Dale smiled, and while the first thing that Jake noticed was nothing close to a full set of teeth, the smile was infectious. His entire skinny face seemed to be smiling, and Dale found himself smiling back without effort. "Nice to meet you," Dale announced, with a voice that matched his squirrely size. It was apparent to Jake that the little man was quite proud to be with Twyla. "Likewise," Jake replied. "Where are you from?" "Oh, I was raised in northern Alabama, just east of Huntsville." Then he smiled his nearly toothless grin and asked, "You ever been there?" Confused, Jake replied, "What's that?" "You ever been there?" "Huntsville." "Oh, no, I've never been there. In fact, I've never been to Alabama, actually." Dale sat and continued, "Huntsville's mostly in Madison County. Got my first radio job there." Jake asked, "You were in radio? A disc jockey?" Dale Cletus Conway smiled his nearly toothless smile, real big and broad, and announced, "Yep, I was a radio announcer for WHIC 1440 AM. Here, his southern influence even thicker, he announced, "And some bitch I's good." Twyla's own smile had been growing ever so steadily from the moment her man had started jabbering. She said, "Don't he got himself a good radio voice, Jake?" Jake couldn't imagine the kind of station that would hire a voice like this, but he hid his amusement and replied, He really does, Miss Twyla." Dale continued, "I didn't have me no radio education, but I was happy to be working, so I was pretty popular at the Hick." "The Hick?" Jake asked. "Yeah, the Hick. WHIC," Dale continued. "That HIC part stood for Hick." Jake laughed. Dale laughed with him, and together the two of them looked at Twyla, who had until now simply delighted herself at listening to the conversation. Then she joined them. "Hick," she announced. "It was a Hick radio station with the same name. I'll be damned." Jake asked Dale what kind of music the station played. "Oh, back then we done played real country music like Marty Robbins and Ray Price. Ever heard of them?" Jake thought for a moment, then replied, "I think I've heard of Ray Price. My dad might have listened to his stuff." Dale said, "That some bitch could make a melody, I tell you." And then Dale began to sing. And Twyla's smile grew even bigger when Dale turned her face her and let out a short verse through his nearly toothless grin. "Four walls to hear me, four walls to see, four walls to near me, closing in on me. Jake, amazed at the dramatic difference between Dale's speaking and his singing voice, looked at Twyla and exclaimed, "Holy shit!" Twyla laughed hard. Jake exclaimed, "He's got some chops, holy shit!" Twyla exclaimed, "Yep, and that's how he got my attention, for damn sure. We was both at Howlin' Bob's up off of Danbury, right there by that bowling alley. I was having me a beer and talking with this real nice waitress when I heard this voice straight from the halls of heaven, coming from the corner of the bar where they got a little stage for singers." Dale sat with a big grin on, listening to his woman spouting his praises, proud as he could be. Twyla continued, "I look over, and there's Dale, singing an old country song." Dale interrupted. "It was Hank Williams, Twyla." "I know that, Dale. Lovesick Blues." She looked at Jake and said, "And I tell you, Jake, that crackling voice part was so sexy." And she nearly fell from her chair when she started to laugh. Throughout the conversation, Bill had been working in the kitchen, restocking the bread and commercial canned goods. He stepped through the swinging doors, and Twyla called out, "Bill, I got someone I want you to meet." Not missing a beat, Dale stood and offered his hand. "Hi, I'm the new manager here at Ken's." Bill, not sure how to respond, slowly reached out to shake Dale's hand. "I'm just shitting you, Bill. I could manage a restaurant about as good as a turtle herd sheep." Then he laughed hard and said, "I'm Dale. Dale Cletus Conway. Nice to meet you." Relieved, Bill smiled and said, "Good to meet you." "You been here a long time, Bill?" "Yes, sir. I suppose I have. 5 years." 5 years? Great. Then Bill asked Dale how he knew Twyla. So, as to avoid Dale's stories all over again, Jake announced, "Well, I got lots to do if we're going to get out of here before midnight." From the kitchen, he could hear Dale's distinctively high-pitched voice through the double doors, and he heard Twyla's laugh, and every few minutes he'd hear the low-pitched sound of Bill's voice, and an occasional chuckle. And when he heard Dale start to sing again, this time the Hank Williams Love Sick song, he shook his head and laughed and said just under his breath, "That is one dumbass hillbilly." Bill returned to the kitchen, shaking his head and smiling, and Jake looked up and said, "Yeah, now that is what you call a good reason to avoid incest, right? Jeez Louise." He threw his arms out and said, "Did you see Twyla when that hillbilly started to sing? I thought she was gonna jump on that little hick right then and there and ride him till she screamed." And he laughed and shook his head, then turned back to his work. Bill stood with his hands at his sides and stared at Jake for a moment. Then he grabbed 2 cardboard boxes and headed for the dumpsters out back. Bill's cold response bothered Jake, not so much as a word. So when Bill returned to the kitchen, Jake asked him what he thought of Dale and his stories. "Well, I thought he was a nice guy. I like him. And he makes Twyla happy." He finally looked at Jake. "Man, if Twyla's happy, I think that's a good thing, because she's a good person." A little annoyed, Jake replied, "I never said a word about Twyla. I like Twyla too, but why the hell she'd fall for something like that is something I just don't," Bill interrupted. "And talking about incest like that is awful insensitive coming from a young boy. I'd be careful with that if I was you. That's all I've got to say about it." Jake attempted a reply, but not before Bill raised his hand and said calmly, "You heard me, Jake." And he walked back through the double doors and into the dining room. Dale had easily slid out of the booth and was helping his big woman do the same. He had her chubby left arm in one grip and her pudgy left hand in the other. Bill hurried over and asked if he could help. He reached over the table and grabbed her other arm, and the two of them pulled her up and out of the chair with relative ease. Twyla let out a long sigh. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead. When she reached up to wipe them away, Dale quickly produced a handkerchief and said, "Here you go." "Here you go, honey. Use this." She smiled and thanked him. Dale offered his hand and said, "It sure was nice to meet you, Bill. I best be heading out now. Got me some work to get to." "It was nice to meet you, Dale," Bill replied. "What kind of work is it you do?"
"Oh, it ain't much. Throw lumber over there off of Nick's mill off of 95 and Railroad. Ever been there?"
"What's that?"
"Nick's lumber mill. You ever been there?"
Oh, yeah. I've been there a few times. Nice place." Wide-eyed, Dale replied,
"Well, if you ever get there again, look me up, will you? I can find a way to discount the discounts."
With sudden concern, he continued,
"It's all on the up and up, you understand. All on the up and up." "Dale's been working at Nick's since it opened," Twyla replied. "And Mr. Farley, that's the owner's name, Nick Farley, took to Dale right away. Even lets him give discounts."
Bill assured Dale that he would look him up the next time he visited Nick's. Dale finally left, and Twyla returned to bussing tables.